Next up, we've got Noivern. This is a unique entry among Pokemon's pantheon of dragons. Yes, it's got the traditional draconic inspiration of a wyvern, but it really resembles a bat above all else. It is a parallel in many ways to Crobat, so this is fitting. Noivern's design has a lot more influence though. It also looks like a gargoyle and a loudspeaker at the same time. As much as we'd love to continue appreciating the depths of its multifaceted design, today we're going to see if there was more to Noivern beyond its exterior and examine how it fared in the competitive scene. And so we ask, how good was Noivern actually? And speaking of dragons, I like my games to keep the action going, and this game I'm going to talk about pretty much guarantees non-stop action and huge battles with and against dragons, because this video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is one of the biggest mobile games ever created and brings a true console/PC level experience to your phone. Did I mention dragons? Because the Lizardmen faction has plenty of dragon champions, with my favorites being Cha-Gur and Fu-Shan. And personally, I love the big boss fights, so I'm always in the dungeons taking on Raid's awesome bosses. But wait, there's more. Download Raid Shadow Legends from the links below, copy your player ID from in-game, and then go to 12daysofraid.plarium.com, enter your player ID, and then set out on a fun festive adventure that lasts 12 days, running from December 19th to January 10th. Each day, play a new minigame for a chance to win some amazing in-game and real-life prizes, including holiday-themed Raid champions and even Amazon gift cards worth up to $1,000. And Raid's got something extra special happening now. They've released a legendary champion based off of the MMA and pro wrestling legend Ronda Rousey. You can get Ronda for free right now, just by logging into Raid. All you've got to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and February 20th, and Ronda's yours. You can also use the special promo code RAIDRONDA to get a bunch of helpful stuff, perfect for leveling your Ronda up so she's at the top of her game. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, click my link in the description or scan my QR code here on screen, and you'll get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking a free epic champion, Ina, 200k silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon awesome champions as soon as you get in-game. All this treasure will be waiting for you right here. And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Noivern actually had the tiniest of tiny niches in X and Y OU. Make no mistake, it wasn't a good Pokemon. It wasn't actually weak necessarily, as it hit decently hard with its solid special attack stat and high-powered stab combination, but its power level paired in comparison to its high-powered dragon-type counterparts, most notably the defining metagame threat Latios, whose essential defensive utility also far eclipsed Noivern's. However, at the end of XY, players were falling over themselves trying to not get completely smashed by Greninja. It killed nearly everything, and it was so fast that, as far as viable Pokemon went, pretty much only Scarfers outran it. This was incredibly exploitable, since the Greninja player could easily take advantage of the unboosted moves these Scarfers would lock themselves into. Here was Noivern's niche. It naturally outsped Greninja, and was thus much more threatening to the opposing team than a Scarfer. It was only used a handful of times, and was as specific as one could get, but it wasn't bad, and was worth mentioning. Sadly, this niche was arguably more interesting than Noivern's place in XYUU. Here, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't of particular impact. In the bulk-centered metagame, it both didn't hit very hard, and its phenomenal speed wasn't especially necessary either. It could potentially irritate walls with its recovery-stifling taunt, but doing so was a risky endeavor given the amount of walls in UU that could exploit its frailty and weaknesses, especially since Florges was its most common switch, and even had the bulk to take Hurricanes well. Come or as, Noivern went from okay to outright ineffective given the newly power-crept surroundings, and dropped from UU, landing in RU. There, it didn't just come into its own, it shattered the tier. The metagame, with a much lower power level than the two above it, was not at all equipped to handle Noivern's powerful stabs. Its Hurricane recalled another broken monster previously allowed in the tier, Moltres, except Noivern's speed gave it more opportunities to fire off that Hurricane than Moltres could dream of. Outspeeding pretty much everything with ease was indeed a major factor for why Noivern was so difficult to deal with. It was Greninja-esque in that sense, since the Scarfers that outsped it being exploitable for its time effectively made it even more dangerous than it already was on its own. Plus, those Scarfers didn't possess the bulk to switch in on its most powerful attacks. Now, Jolteon did naturally outspeed it and resist Hurricane, but it was also ground into a fine powder by Draco Meteor, so it wasn't exactly eager to switch in either. Between choice specs for immediate vicious power that made its attacks even more spammable and made its flamethrower even more effective at melting steel types, and its taunt roost set that let it wear down bulky Pokemon while having longevity itself, Noivern was an incredibly oppressive force in RU, forcing players to use overly specific sets that weren't too great otherwise, like specially defensive Piloswine and Aromatisse, as well as any form of Togetic, which rose to RU proper out of the tier's desperate need to have something to withstand Noivern. Offensive teams got absolutely shellacked by Noivern so hilariously that they couldn't even keep themselves safe from revenge kills with substitutes, since Noivern's Infiltrator ability bypassed them. Additionally, bulky teams would struggle to accomplish anything if Noivern was having a good day, since its hyper-spammable Hurricane also came with a brutal 30% confusion rate, as if it wasn't brutal enough. Dealing with Noivern was quite unreasonable for RU, and thus it was banned from the tier. So all in all, a solid debut generation. In VGC 2014, Noivern wasn't a bad Pokemon in and of itself, with its phenomenal speed giving it that all-important jump on opposing Dragon types. It also had an excellent ability in Frisk, letting it scout opposing items, an especially valuable information-gaining trait in best-of-3 formats. Noivern could weaken opposing Pokemon into KO range from teammates through Super Fang, and had one of the best supporting moves, Tailwind. And these were all major advantages over its primary competition, fellow Draco Meteor spammers Salamence and Hydreigon. However, those dragons were generally preferred for the simple fact that their Draco Meteors were much stronger than Noivern's. The leap from Noivern's base 97 to Salamance's base 110 was utterly staggering, let alone Hydreigon's base 125. If the metagame could withstand Mence and Hydreigon's meteors, shrugging off Noivern's was a piece of cake. This didn't make Noivern bad, just more specific and thus harder to fit on a team. And it did have its successes, as its advantages were significant enough to justify its usage. Dominic N's top 4 placement at the Adelaide Regionals utilized Noivern's Frisk to great effect, scouting potential Megastones on Pokemon like Gyarados and Choice Scarf on opposing Salamence before using Tailwind to support Mega Charizard Y. Samuel East achieved the Nugget Bridge Invitational's runner-up position using Noivern, with its taunt being useful to nullify Aegislash's King's Shield and thus allow his partner Mega Kangaskhan to Sucker Punch it safely. However, as Mega Mawile took over the metagame at the end of 2014, Noivern basically disappeared completely in favor of Salamence, whose Intimidate and much stronger fire coverage were far better suited for the tier at the time. And Noivern wouldn't make a comeback either. Evan Bates reached 14th at the US Nationals with it in 2015, and Bjorn Johnson reached 13th at the US Nationals with it in 2016, but by and large, it had no metagame impact. Still, Noivern wasn't a terrible Pokemon by any means, just one that struggled to differentiate itself from its outstanding competitors. Generation 7 returned Noivern to RU, and with power creep it was no longer broken, but it was absolutely excellent. It used its tremendous speed and solid offensive presence to act as a consistently useful offensive check to opposing threats, especially with its valuable set of resistances giving it plenty of switching opportunity, while its support move pool allowed it to mess with defensive Pokemon. Its primary set was the Taunt Roost Stallbreaker, with leftovers enhancing its defensive utility while also giving it more longevity in Wars of Attrition, where it tried to wear down bulkier teams. It also was a phenomenal momentum machine, using U-turn in its last move slot to capitalize on the many switches it forced, making its teammates even more threatening as well. Wait, no Dragon Stab? Yep, that's right. Hurricane's coverage was so good against so many common top-tier threats that it didn't even need anything else. It already had all the coverage necessary to blow away Pokemon it was tasked with checking, like Virizion, Toxicroak, Machamp, Shaman, Roserade, Gossaleopod, and Pangoro, while hitting crucial neutral targets like Salazzle and Mega Blastoise plenty hard enough. Noivern could also use Flynium Z to great effect on this set. While it didn't love losing the residual health, the benefits were enormous, as the power boost let Noivern steal KOs against neutral targets where it otherwise have no chance of grabbing them, which was game-changing, especially against its nemesis, Florges. Supersonic Sky Strike bypassing Hurricane's accuracy was valuable as well, in general use for sure, but especially if the Sun from Ninetales' Drought was active, whose ability to knock Hurricane's accuracy down to 50% was a great deterrent to its use and thus Noivern's effectiveness. Furthermore, Noivern loved its newfound ability to sponge knockoff by virtue of carrying a Z Crystal. Noivern wasn't solely beholden to the Stallbreaker set though. It was also one of the metagame's best Choice Scarfers. Running Scarf on such a fast Pokemon may seem wasteful, but Scarf Noivern was so fast that it was able to revenge kill offensive threats that doubled their speed, a quality as valuable as it was rare. It could thus check the terrifying Rock Polish Tyrantrum and Shell Smash Barbercoal even if they managed to boost safely. It didn't lose its utility against defensive teams either, with Switcheroo it would absolutely ruin a wall looking to withstand its attacks. This alone would have made it excellent, but it also maintained the capacity of enhancing its teammates' threat potential by forcing switches and capitalizing on those to bring them in unscathed through U-turn. Noivern could be fairly liberal with its use of switcheroo too, not just against more dedicated bulky teams. As long as there wasn't a setup sweeper it needed to retain its scarf to be able to check, it was able to unleash its scarf onto walls and bulkier Pokemon found as backbones even on more offensive teams, since it was so fast and it blazed past nearly the entire unboosted tier with ease. And so Noivern was a superb, defining Pokemon in Generation 7 RU. In the initial stages of Generation 8 UU, Noivern immediately established itself as one of the most ferocious Dynamax abusers around. Anything with max airstream was excellent, but Noivern went beyond that. It had perfect neutral coverage with plenty of super effective hits to boot, its superb speed, and high-powered stabs boosted further by Life Orb to shatter would-be checks like Gastrodon and Galarian Weezing. Noivern didn't stop once Dynamax was banned though. The metagame settled and it quickly proved itself the single best Pokemon around. The metagame was first dominated by bulky balanced teams anchored by Pokemon like Milotic and Umbreon. However, they had the nasty tendency to be quite slow and thus easily exploited by defense-smashing wall breakers like Pangoro and Swords Dance Cobalion. Noivern was the missing link these teams needed to be nearly unstoppable all around, using its superb speed, fair bulk, and valuable resistances to act as an excellent offensive check to them. Repeatedly too, since it healed with Roost and was no longer plagued by its pesky Stealth Rock weakness thanks to the newly added heavy-duty boots. It also threatened pretty much the entire tier in return, with the newfound Pokemon that could withstand its hits. Coincidentally, the bulky pokes it was such a great partner to, being incredibly exploitable with a simple, safe U-turn into a threatening teammate. This made Noivern superb on offensive teams as well. Noivern was such an amazing piece of team glue, such an incredibly consistent in-battle performer that every team wanted to use it, and they pretty much did. Its usage nearly hit 70%. This meant it was basically the Landorus T of UU. Then the Isle of Armor came around and Noivern slowed down for about 2 seconds. As soon as the hype of the new toys died down, Noivern forcefully reminded everyone how excellent it was. It did exactly what it had done before, just with new surroundings. It was particularly valuable at dominating the newcomer Zarude, while also dealing with common threats in Chandelure and Obstagoon. Sure, it was no longer the unequivocal best Pokemon in the tier, as it had to share the throne with Slowbro and Galarian Slowbro, but Noivern stepped down was being a top 3 UU Pokemon. It was utterly superb. Sadly, this didn't last, as the Crown Tundra's enormous power creep completely toppled the structures of every metagame. Noivern felt its effects to the point where it didn't just tumble out of UU, but tumbled all the way down to its first ever appearance in NU. There, it was absolutely amazing, as the metagame was incredibly similar to the initial UU metagame it had ruled over, but this lasted briefly, as the RU player base quickly recognized Noivern's excellence in the tier and spammed it in usage enough for it to return to the tier it had been so superb in twice previously. The new RU meta resembled another previous UU Noivern had loved, the one characterized by Zarude and Galarian Slowbro, and thus it quickly began to rule the roost. Its main issue was the prominence and excellence of Togekiss, which was a superb check. As the tier progressed, other nuances began popping up too. Flygon and Crobat established themselves as the two best Pokemon in the metagame, and Noivern struggled for the usage it had previously commanded so effortlessly, when it was competing with these two rulers of the tier for a team slot, among many other advantageous traits. These two Pokemon notably did not struggle with Togekiss to the extent Noivern did. Still, Noivern remained immensely useful. It just went the way of previously dominant Pokemon in that its greatness became more specific. However, we don't have to end on a down note, because Noivern beat the odds, beat the trends, beat the history of Pokemon being unable to maintain roles in higher tiers in the face of power creep. It maintained a niche in UU, and not just a lip service one, a genuinely great one. Yes, it competed with the likes of Salamence and Crobat, but Noivern blended Mensa's typing and coverage with Crobat's speed to create an entirely unique presence in the metagame. This gave it the incredibly rare, valuable trait of being able to switch into and check two of the most threatening Pokemon around, Azelf and Cobalion. It also had a unique offensive presence in that, unlike the same type Ments, its stab combination couldn't be neutered by naturally fast Pokemon like Keldeo, Thundurus T, and Zygarde 10%. If anything, Noivern was used to check them. So all in all, Generation 8 was Noivern's strongest yet. And finally, though Generation 9 is far too new to cover competitively yet, at the time of this video, UU has just come into existence, and Noivern has already terrified the tier again with a Choice Specs Boomburst set that terrestrializes normal type for monstrous power on the move. And that's it. So how good was Noivern actually? Well, it's been a superb lower tier Pokemon since its inception. RU has been its best metagame overall, starting with its debut generation where it smashed the tier into smithereens, then Gen 7 where it was an excellent defining presence, then in Gen 8 where it was so once again. Gen 8 also saw it utterly dominate UU to extents few Pokemon ever have. Noivern's a uniquely equipped Pokemon. It's why even when it's not great, like in Gen 6 VGC, it still has something only it can do. So overall, Noivern has had a successful, interesting, competitive history. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Noivern? How would you buff it to make it OU? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.